Open an old kitchen drawer and you might still find a faded cookbook with pages stained by butter and thyme. Inside were the recipes that once filled American homes with warm, simple suppers. Many came from the famous Betty Crocker kitchen, guiding families through busy evenings with meals that were affordable, comforting, and surprisingly creative. But over the years, many of those dishes quietly disappeared from dinner tables. Tonight, we're bringing them back. These are 10 forgotten Betty Crocker recipes that once defined weeknight cooking, recipes that grandparents knew by heart, meals that turned ordinary ingredients into unforgettable family traditions. Impossible cheeseburger pie. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, American kitchens were changing. Families were busier than ever, and home cooks wanted meals that were simple, affordable, and filling. That's when one of the most curious recipes began appearing in cookbooks and on kitchen tables across the country: impossible cheeseburger pie. The name alone sounded like a trick. How could a pie form its own crust while baking? Yet that was exactly the magic that made this dish famous. The secret was a baking mix batter poured over seasoned ground beef and onions. As the pie baked in the oven, the batter separated and formed a soft crust on the bottom while becoming fluffy on top. For many home cooks, it felt almost like kitchen science. The dish usually started with browned ground beef cooked with chopped onions, sometimes with a little salt, pepper, and Worcestershire sauce. That savory mixture was spread into a pie dish and sprinkled with shredded cheese. Then a simple batter made from baking mix, milk, and eggs was poured over everything. Once baked, the result looked like a golden savory pie that could be sliced just like dessert. Families loved it because it was quick and used ingredients almost every household already had. It was hearty enough to feed several people and simple enough for a weeknight supper. During the 1970s, this recipe became a quiet classic. Many parents kept it in their regular dinner rotation, especially on nights when time was short and hungry kids were waiting at the table. Today, impossible cheeseburger pie is rarely mentioned, but those who remember it often smile at the memory. It was warm, simple, and comforting. Sometimes the most unforgettable meals were also the easiest ones to make. Chicken a la king on toast. Long before quick drive-through dinners became common, many American households relied on simple homemade meals that felt a little elegant, even on an ordinary evening. One such dish that appeared in countless mid-century cookbooks was chicken a la king on toast. During the 1940s and 1950s, this creamy chicken dish was considered both comforting and slightly special. It was often served when families wanted something warm and satisfying without spending hours in the kitchen. The recipe became especially popular in home cooking guides because it used leftover chicken, something many households tried not to waste. The dish usually began with small pieces of cooked chicken gently warmed in a creamy white sauce made from butter, milk, and flour. Into that sauce went simple additions that gave the dish color and flavor: green peas, diced pimentos, and sometimes mushrooms. The result was a rich, velvety mixture that smelled incredible as it simmered slowly on the stove. But what made this meal memorable was how it was served. Instead of being placed over rice or pasta, the creamy chicken was spooned over slices of golden toasted bread. The toast acted like a sturdy base, soaking up the warm sauce while still keeping a bit of crisp texture. For many families, this was a perfect supper after a long day. It felt filling but not heavy, and the ingredients were easy to keep on hand. Parents appreciated that it stretched leftover chicken into a full meal for the entire table. Over time, as cooking styles changed and quicker packaged meals appeared, chicken a la king slowly faded from everyday cooking. Yet those who grew up eating it often remember the comforting aroma drifting from the kitchen and the simple joy of sitting down to a warm plate on a cool evening. Tuna noodle casserole. In many American kitchens of the 1950s and 1960s, dinner often came together with whatever ingredients were already in the pantry. One dish that perfectly captured that spirit was tuna noodle casserole. It was simple, affordable, and dependable, a meal that could feed an entire family without much effort. Canned tuna had become a common staple after World War II. It was inexpensive, easy to store, and packed with protein. When home cooks combined it with egg noodles, a creamy sauce, and a few pantry vegetables, the result was a casserole that quickly became a household favorite. The preparation was wonderfully straightforward. Cooked egg noodles were mixed with canned tuna, a creamy soup base, and often a handful of peas or chopped celery for a little texture. Everything was stirred together in a baking dish and topped with something crunchy. Sometimes it was breadcrumbs, crushed crackers, or even potato chips. Once placed in the oven, the casserole baked into a warm, bubbling dish with a golden, crisp top. For busy families, this recipe was a lifesaver. It required very little preparation and used ingredients most kitchens already had on the shelf. Parents could prepare it quickly, slide it into the oven, and have dinner ready before the evening rush truly began. Beyond convenience, tuna noodle casserole carried a feeling of comfort. The creamy sauce, soft noodles, and savory tuna created a meal that felt warm and satisfying, especially on cold evenings. Today, this dish rarely appears on modern dinner tables, but it once held an important place in everyday American cooking. For many people who grew up during that era, the sight of a bubbling casserole dish still brings back memories of family dinners, crowded kitchen tables, and the quiet comfort of a homemade meal. Sloppy Joe's skillet supper. There was a time when weeknight dinners in America needed to be fast, filling, and made with ingredients already sitting in the kitchen. One recipe that answered that need perfectly was the Sloppy Joe skillet supper. It took the familiar flavors of a Sloppy Joe sandwich and turned them into a warm, one-pan meal that families could serve straight from the stove. The foundation of this dish was simple ground beef, browned in a large skillet until the kitchen filled with its savory aroma. Chopped onions were often added next, softening in the pan and giving the meal a rich, comforting flavor. Once the meat was ready, a tangy tomato-based sauce was stirred in. The sauce usually combined tomato sauce or ketchup with a bit of mustard, brown sugar, and spices. The result was that unmistakable sweet and slightly smoky taste that made Sloppy Joe's so popular. But this skillet supper went a step further than the sandwich version. Instead of piling the mixture onto hamburger buns, the beef and sauce were cooked together with simple pantry ingredients like macaroni or sometimes diced potatoes. Everything simmered together until the pasta or potatoes absorbed the bold flavors of the sauce. For families during the 1960s and 1970s, this was the kind of meal that made busy evenings easier. It required only one pan, minimal preparation, and could feed several hungry people without much cost. Children especially loved the slightly messy, saucy flavor that made Sloppy Joe dishes so memorable. It wasn't fancy cooking, but it was satisfying and dependable. As years passed, quick box dinners slowly replaced many homemade skillet meals. Yet the Sloppy Joe skillet supper remains a reminder of a time when dinner was simple, hearty, and cooked with whatever ingredients were already waiting in the cupboard. Beef stroganoff with egg noodles. During the 1960s, many American home cooks began experimenting with recipes that felt a little more international while still being easy enough for everyday dinners. One dish that quickly found its place in family kitchens was beef stroganoff with egg noodles. Though its roots traced back to Russia, the version many families knew became a classic through mid-century cookbooks and weeknight meal guides. The American kitchen version was comforting, creamy, and surprisingly simple. It usually began with strips of beef browned in a hot skillet, filling the kitchen with a rich, savory aroma. Onions and sometimes mushrooms were added next, cooking slowly until they softened and released their earthy flavor. The true character of the dish came from its creamy sauce. Sour cream was stirred into the pan along with beef broth and seasonings, creating a thick, silky mixture that coated every piece of meat. The sauce had a slightly tangy flavor that balanced beautifully with the hearty beef. But the dish would not have been complete without egg noodles. These wide, tender noodles were perfect for soaking up the rich sauce. Once cooked, the noodles were placed on plates or in large bowls, and the creamy beef mixture was spooned generously over the top. For families, this meal felt a little special compared to everyday casseroles. It looked impressive when served at the table, yet it didn't require complicated ingredients or hours of cooking. Many parents prepared it when they wanted a dinner that felt comforting but also slightly elegant. Over time, changing food trends pushed many classic skillet meals out of the spotlight. Yet beef stroganoff with egg noodles remains a memory of that era when home cooks blended simple ingredients with flavors from around the world to create something warm, satisfying, and unforgettable. Ham and potato scallop bake. In many American homes during the 1950s and 1960s, nothing went to waste in the kitchen. Leftover ham from a weekend dinner often found its way into the next day's meal, and one of the most comforting ways to use it was in a dish known as ham and potato scallop bake. This recipe was the definition of practical home cooking. It used simple ingredients that most families already had: potatoes, bits of ham, milk, butter, and a few basic seasonings. Yet when these ingredients came together in the oven, they created something far richer than anyone expected. The preparation began with thinly sliced potatoes layered carefully in a baking dish. Between those layers, small pieces of ham were scattered, adding a smoky, savory flavor that filled the kitchen as the dish cooked. A creamy sauce made from butter, flour, and milk was then poured over everything, slowly seeping down through the layers. As the bake spent time in the oven, the potatoes softened and absorbed the rich sauce. The ham released its flavor into every bite, while the top of the dish gradually turned golden and slightly crisp. For families, this meal had a special kind of comfort. It was warm, filling, and perfect for cooler evenings when everyone gathered around the table after a long day. It also stretched a small amount of ham into a dish large enough to feed the whole household. Meals like this reflected a time when cooking was about making the most of what was available. Simple ingredients were transformed into something satisfying and nourishing. Today, ham and potato scallop bake is rarely seen outside of old cookbooks, but for many people, the memory of that creamy, bubbling dish coming out of the oven still represents the warmth and resourcefulness of mid-century home cooking. Cornbread tamale pie. In the middle of the 20th century, American kitchens began blending flavors from different traditions, creating dishes that felt both familiar and a little adventurous. One of the most memorable examples was cornbread tamale pie, a hearty casserole that appeared in many home cookbooks and quickly became a favorite family supper. Despite its name, this dish wasn't a traditional tamale. Instead, it was a creative home-style version inspired by the bold flavors of Mexican cooking. At the bottom of the baking dish was a rich mixture of seasoned ground beef simmered with tomatoes, onions, and mild spices. Sometimes corn or beans were added, giving the filling even more texture and flavor. Once the savory base was ready, the real magic began. A thick cornbread batter was spread across the top of the meat mixture. As the pie baked in the oven, the cornbread slowly rose and turned golden, forming a soft, slightly sweet crust over the savory filling beneath. When served, each spoonful revealed two layers: the warm, crumbly cornbread on top and the rich, seasoned meat underneath. The combination of flavors made the dish comforting and satisfying, especially on chilly evenings. For many families in the 1950s and 1960s, cornbread tamale pie felt exciting compared to ordinary casseroles. It brought a hint of Southwestern flavor to the dinner table while still using ingredients that were easy to find in local grocery stores. Another reason for its popularity was how well it fed a crowd. One baking dish could serve several hungry people, making it perfect for large families or gatherings around the table. Although modern cooking trends have introduced countless new recipes, cornbread tamale pie still holds a nostalgic place in American food history. It represents a time when home cooks experimented with flavors and created simple meals that felt both comforting and a little adventurous. Salmon patties with cream sauce. During the 1940s and 1950s, American households often faced the challenge of stretching ingredients while still serving meals that felt satisfying and a little special. One solution was the humble salmon patty, a recipe that transformed canned salmon into golden, flavorful cakes. Paired with a creamy sauce, these patties became a beloved mid-century dinner that many families enjoyed. The preparation was straightforward but clever. Canned salmon was flaked and mixed with breadcrumbs, eggs, and a touch of seasoning, usually salt, pepper, and a hint of onion or celery for added texture. Some families added a little mustard or herbs to brighten the flavor. The mixture was then shaped into small patties and gently pan-fried in butter or oil until they were golden and crisp on the outside, while remaining tender on the inside. The cream sauce was the finishing touch. A simple combination of butter, flour, milk, and sometimes a splash of lemon juice or a pinch of nutmeg created a silky sauce that elevated the modest salmon patties into a comforting, elegant meal. The sauce was spooned over the patties just before serving, providing a warm, flavorful contrast to the crispy exterior. Salmon patties were practical, affordable, and quick, perfect for busy families or for using up pantry staples. They also carried a sense of nostalgia, reminding households of frugal yet satisfying meals that never sacrifice taste. Though rarely found on modern menus, salmon patties with cream sauce hold a quiet charm. They speak to a time when home cooks transformed simple canned ingredients into dishes that felt like family favorites, offering warmth, flavor, and a touch of elegance in every bite. For those who remember them, these patties evoke the cozy aroma of mid-century kitchens and the comforting rhythm of family dinners around the table. As we close the cookbook and step back into today's fast-paced world, these forgotten Betty Crocker recipes remind us of a time when dinners were simple, comforting, and made with care. From creamy casseroles to golden skillet meals, each dish tells a story of family kitchens, resourcefulness, and flavors that shaped generations. Bringing these recipes back isn't just about cooking, it's about reconnecting with the warmth and creativity of mid-century home life. If you loved this trip through nostalgic kitchens, subscribe and join us as we uncover more lost recipes, keeping the flavors and stories of the past alive.